You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello and welcome to the 42 Cast, your ultimate answer to fandom, geekiness, and everything. As always, I am your host, Nathan, and we have another great episode lined up for you where we're going to talk about Dune. And if you're asking which version of Dune, the answer is yes. But before we do that, let's meet our cast for this week. So starting off, he is my oldest friend. He and Godzilla are best pals, and that is Kevin. How are you doing, Kevin?
Doing great, Nathan. Thanks. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So what's new for you since the last time you were on the show like 2 weeks ago?
I started a new job. So my first day was yesterday. So I worked yesterday, today. I say worked. It's like orientation week. So in nursing, like there's a bajillion trainings you have to do, a bunch of computer training before you can even start like orientation with patients. So it's nothing too exciting, but it is a big deal for me because I haven't worked in over 2 years. So, I had to set an alarm and wake up like before my body wanted to get up. So, it's all new.
I'm sorry. Every time you talk about this, you sound like the most entitled person in the world, where it's just like, oh my God, like I had to actually set an alarm. Like, how can you live like this? It's like what everybody else has to do, like all the time.
Yeah, well, I waited like 23 years to not have to set the alarm anymore and was very happy to not do it. But I do also like having, spending money and stuff. And I do need to maintain my skills as a nurse. So if I do ever need a full-time job, they won't be like, why is there a 10-year gap in your resume? So it's a good thing overall for me.
All right. Well, very cool. And it's good to have you back on the show, Kevin.
Thanks.
All right. And next up, she's coming at us from tomorrow. And that is my friend, Jess. How are you doing, Jess?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right. And what's new and exciting for you since the last time you were on, which might have been a year ago?
I don't know. It's been a while.
Yeah.
I didn't kind of do the math there, but we've just been kind of cycling through some TV shows on my podcast, trying to keep busy until we cover Superman and Lois again. So, I haven't started a new job or anything exciting like that. That would be great, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's kind of weird when the podcast that is the show that's the name of your podcast doesn't exist anymore. So
I know. Yeah. Well, we've most recently ventured into the Tomorrow People, so that's getting closer. But we've only got a season of that. So
right. Yeah. So have you thought about like just renaming your podcast to something else?
we haven't. We've kind of just embraced like the whole like Tomorrow's Legends theme as just like anything like that's superhero related. So we're just kind of like anyone that's a legend. I don't know. We're just kind of rolling with it.
Okay.
No one's been complaining, although our listening numbers are a little bit down because we don't have anything consistent other than Superman. So
yeah, well, tell me about that. Like the dips and and spikes of listenership based on what subject or topic you're talking about, because that is my show every episode.
True. Yeah. But it's cool. We're having fun.
Yeah, good. It's good to have you back on the show, Jess.
Great to be here.
All right, next up, we have one of two new people on the show. He is someone that I met in the dim, dark days of the internet back in the 90s, and then we reconnected when we randomly saw each other at a local con, and that is Nathan Skreslet. How are you doing, Nathan?
Doing great.
And so, since it's your first time on the show, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, I'm probably best known as the artist behind it's an art project called Pixel Who, where we do original 8-bit artwork based on we started out doing only Doctor Who, but we branched out into a variety of other fandoms that we enjoy. Yeah, it's all old school retro 8-bit sort of type of thing. However, I'm also a professional concept artist. I'm also a freelance graphic designer. I wear a lot of hats.
Yeah. And I will personally attest to the fact, because some of his work does adorn my wall, but that his stuff is really good. Of course, I am also a fan of 8-bit video games, so that's it's a natural combination there. Although I think you've also done you did some books for some book covers for at least some of the Doctor Who short story collections and stuff like that, back in the day
Oh
too,
yeah,
didn't you? Yeah.
Way back in the day. It's funny. At the time I did a lot of those book covers, I was a teenager, and the clients did not know that because I was working remotely, and most of them are in England.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, you do professional work. It doesn't matter how old you are. So, yeah. But yeah, what is your primary fandom, Nathan?
It would probably be Doctor Who, but Dune's a close second, so I'm really glad to be here.
Oh, okay, good. Awesome. Yeah, and it's good to have you on the show.
Glad to be here.
All right. And finally is someone that I've met through Dragon Con and various geeky things around Dragon Con. I've been on his show talking about Babylon 5, and that is Van Allen Plexico. How are you doing, Van?
Hey, I'm really happy to be here, Nathan. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the show. And why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
I'm a professor of political science and history, so this has been a month. I'm the author of 22 fiction books and about 10 nonfiction books. Originally, I was known for being the founder of AvengersAssemble.net. Wrote on those coattails for a number of years, but now I do the White Rocket podcast, which talks about all kind of stuff, and of course the one you've been on, the White Rocket Babylon 5 review podcast. So you might have been on the other one too. I can't remember.
No, I've never been on the other one.
That one, okay. Almost everybody else I know has at some point. It's interesting. And then, of course, we also have On Her Majesty's Secret podcast, our James Bond show. So, yeah. And I like Dune a lot. I've read all the original books, and I've read a bunch of the newer young adult ones, I would call them, and seen all the various incarnations of it. It's a great story. It's basically, I always say, it's Star Wars for smart people, and. But I think across my entire life, I think the Marvel universe has always been my main fandom more than anything else. I think I know it, encyclopedically know it. Of course, these days a lot of people do, but I have since I was like 8. But Babylon 5 is probably the big one in terms of just sheer love and joy. That's why we're doing the podcast. You have to really be in love with something to do a multi-year show just about it, right? And I do that. So, and with you occasionally. So,
right, yeah, no, and I love it every time you have me on the show because, yeah, reliving my love of Babylon 5 has been fantastic.
We have you on at the end of each season, but here's the thing: we're dragging this thing out. We blew through the first couple of seasons and then realized we were going way too fast. Season 5 is taking far longer than it deserves, but it's taking like 2 years to get through season 5. But the day is coming when you're going to come back up and tell us what you think about season 5.
And by then, I'll have finished my Blu-ray set that I just bought, so I'll be caught up, and I won't just be going from memory. So, yeah.
Good deal.
All right, yeah, it's good to have you on the show finally, Van. All right, so normally we'd have our 5-minute controversy here, but with a topic like this and with 4 guests on the show, we are just too jam-packed to do a 5-minute controversy, so we're not doing one of those this week. But we are going to talk about Dune, but first we're going to pause for a promo from another fine podcast, and then we'll come right back.
Winter is coming. Prepare with a fine cigar and listen to the Cigar Nerds podcast. We smoke cigars and talk about movies and all kind of nerdy things. Available at cigarnerdpodcast.com. Also on the ESO Network at esonetwork.com.
And we're back. And like I mentioned at the top of the show, we are talking about Dune. And while I would love to talk about the novel in addition to everything else, and of course we're going to comment on the novel, I'm sure, in some of what we're going to talk about, I don't think we could cram all the adaptations and the novel itself into a single podcast episode. And I didn't have the time to reread the novel, even though I have read it several times throughout my life. So maybe it's not as big a deal as I think it is. But we're talking about all the different adaptations of the Dune story that have come out there. But before we get started, I did want to do what Van already did and just sort of give what is your level of engagement with Dune. Like, when did you first encounter it? Did you encounter it through one of the movies or the miniseries first? Did you read the novel first? All that sort of stuff. So let's start with you, Jess. How'd you get into Dune?
So I think I saw bits and pieces of the sci-fi series like on TV, and I was just kind of like, who are these people with like these blue eyes? And I just kind of thought it was interesting. I was kind of young. And so from there, I figured out it was a book, and then I figured out it was a series. And so I kind of dove into the novels, and I actually didn't revisit any of the older versions until you asked me to join this podcast. So it's been really interesting, kind of getting to go back, watching everything, watching the different versions, like some of which I didn't even know existed of the original Dune. And so that's been kind of fun. I've really been digging the new movies. I like them a whole lot. And then I love the book, but like you, I haven't reread it in it's probably been 20 years since I read Dune. So I didn't have time to reread it. I was tempted to, but I'm just going to have to go off of my memory and what I felt better represented the novel. So
yeah, it hasn't quite been 20 years for me. I had back surgery and when I was 28, which was like 16 years ago. And that I was laid up, obviously. And so I reread all the Frank Herbert Dune books at that point. Because I had nothing to do, and those are dense books, so being able to focus on them was actually pretty good. But yeah, that's the last time I read them. But I've read them several times throughout my life, or at least I've reread the first one several times throughout my life. Nathan, what about you?
I actually came to Dune in kind of a roundabout way. I first encountered the Dune video game, Dune 2. When I was probably, I don't know, somewhere between like 12 and 14. It was on the computers in our school computer lab. We had an after school club. We'd go play games after school once a week. I would play this game incessantly. I absolutely loved it.
Now, I never played either of the games, but I listened to a video game history podcast, and they did do an episode on Dune a few months back. Is that the one that's more like a war game, or is that the one that's more like an RPG?
This is the one's more like a war game. Was actually the very, very first real-time strategy game pretty much ever built. All the other ones since then, Warcraft, Starcraft, all that stuff are kind of based on the model they created. But it was such a fascinating universe, and that's what really caught my attention at the time, because I was already a fan of Doctor Who and Star Trek and all this stuff, but this was a wildly different universe. And then I learned it was a book. I go, oh, okay. So I went to my school library. They had them all. All the ones that were published at the time. It was all the original Herbert books. And then, I was probably too young to understand a lot of it at the time, but these things are so densely packed and incredibly dense, philosophy and just layered narrative that I come back to them about every 10 years and I get something different out of them each time. From there, I watch all of the adaptations, love the 2 sci-fi miniseries, love the current films. It's just a fascinating universe to explore. There's a bunch of new games coming down the pipeline that I'm excited to try out, though I'll probably need a new system for some of them.
All right, well, very cool. All right, Kevin.
Well, I honestly don't remember if I read the book first or if I saw it on TV first, and then that made me read the book. But it was around the same time. It was long
And
ago.
that would
I
be
was
the David
very
Lynch
young.
movie, because that was before there was anything else.
Yes, yes. So, as a young teenager, I read the book and I watched the David Lynch, I just call it the 1984 Dune. I watched it many times. I had an old beat up VHS copy, like recorded off of the television, and so God, there's so many different versions too, with different intros, and it's really wild. But so I really loved Dune and loved the movie, and I'm pretty sure I got you into Dune as well, or pointed you in that direction. I think I probably watched the 2000 sci-fi Dune back when it came out, but it was so long ago I had like no memory.
Yeah, I can't
that.
remember if that's one of those things that I recorded and then like watched with you, because like after you after you went to basic training and everything, there were times when I would like be like, oh, you got to watch this thing, and when I visited you, I'd be like, let's watch this, like, yeah.
I think so, but it would have only been once. I didn't really remember it. And then I reread the book once or twice over the years, but it had been over 20 years since I read the book. So I did actually reread. Well, I say reread. I actually listened to the audio book version, which was good because I've been like going on walks every day, so I could multitask. And
there are people who think that that's like wrong, like to like listen to audiobooks and stuff, and it's just like, what? I mean, you're experiencing the story.
Back in my day, we didn't have these books. We had fine oral traditions where stories were passed down. So not sure if I buy into these new age books. So oral tradition is really the original way. But and then the new Dunes, part 1 and part 2, I watched that. I absolutely love them. And then I just rewatched the 2000 sci-fi Dune a couple days ago. So my brain is like fully saturated with Dune right now.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm pretty sure Kevin's the one. Like, I know my dad had also read Dune, so he might have gotten me to read it, and then we might have just talked about it. I can't remember what the impetus was to read Dune, but I definitely started with the novel. I do know you're the one who got me to sit down and watch the movie, because I remember that, and I believe like the TV version, because I'm pretty sure you had the TV version of the movie, because it's longer than I was surprised when I saw the theatrical, version, because I was like, wow, that's way shorter than I remembered it being, and it was like missing scenes that I was pretty sure I had seen, in there, and so, yeah, I'm pretty sure. And also was missing the intro that I remembered, which was like the history
cool
lesson.
With those paintings.
Right, yeah, with the paintings about the Machine Crusade and everything. And I was like, wait, what? Where's that? Like, that's how this is supposed to open. So, yeah. So that's the version I always think of as the movie. And so I was kind of surprised, that wasn't part of the actual like version that people saw in movie theaters years ago. And now I understand like all the people who are like, oh my God, that movie is so awful. I'm like, oh, you saw like a short version of it that is really hard to convey that story in 2 hours. Yeah, but anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. But yeah, so I watched the sci-fi version as it came out, and of course I saw the 2 new movies as they came out. And I've read through all of Frank Herbert's books, and then I kind of have a weird association with the stuff his son has done. I kind of dip into them and dip out of them a little bit. So I feel like quality wise, they are all over the place, which is weird because it's consistent authors. It's Frank Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson writing them all, but it's like some of them I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. And other ones I'm like, did you guys need a paycheck this week or something? Like, what's going on here? So like, I don't know. But yeah, I haven't, but yeah, a bunch have come out since the last time I bought any. So I am by no means caught up with like the whole bit that they've done. But anyway, so yeah, that's where I'm coming at it from. Then, since I didn't actually ask you that question, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to what you said before.
I didn't remember saying much of anything about it. I first started seeing the first 3 books in advertisements when probably in middle school, around 7th, 8th grade. And this was probably around 1980. And I picked up the Brown Dune book and read about 3 pages. And I remember I was like, 12. And I remember thinking, yeah, I'm not old enough for this. So I put it down and said, I'll get to it later. And then I think it was when God Emperor of Dune came out. I want to say God Emperor came out in 84 around the same time as the movie, maybe.
Heretics came out in around the time of the movie.
Okay, so God Emperor must have come out around 82 then, maybe 81, 82, something like that. But anyway, whenever God Emperor came out, I went back and started it again and read it in high school, and really loved it that time. Got all the way through it, and really loved it. And so then when the 84 movie came out, I was so excited that I just started dating a girl in high school, and I said, we got to go see this. It's the coolest story ever. And, 2.5 hours later, she didn't want to go out with me anymore. Because it was so bad. For anybody who had no idea what they were talking about, what it was about or anything. And so, that began my love-hate relationship with that first movie. But I still loved the story, and so I read all the books, and then certainly saw the two TV miniseries when they came out, and definitely have thoughts about them. And honestly, when I heard that they were going to remake Dune recently, right? And I remember thinking, why do we have to have 3 versions of this when we haven't got any versions of Ringworld, Chronicles of Amber? Like, there's like a long list of things I love they've never even tried to make, but they're going to keep doing Dune over and over, Battlestar Galactica over and over. Why do we get the same things over and over? I was really upset about that. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then I went and saw Blade Runner 2049. And when I came out of Blade Runner 2049, I said, man, that guy needs to, if they're going to do another Dune movie, that guy needs to do it. And then I looked on my phone and I was like, well, crap. Okay, he is. So that was the thing that got me over. I was not interested in a third retread of this story until I found out it was Denis that was doing it. And then I'm like, okay, I'll give it a shot. So that's it.
All right. Yeah. So I've been kind of going back and forth on this, but as far as which question I was going to start off with, but I think what I want to start off with is which version is your personal favorite of the story, besides the not like of the adaptations. So let's start with you on this one, Nathan.
Oh gosh. I would have to say a personal favorite is the second of the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries, the Children of Dune adaptation.
Oh, that's good.
It's just so beautifully shot. Like the ending of part 1, where they do that musical montage over Janie giving birth to the twins and them, killing the Guild Navigator and all that stuff. It's just such a gorgeous sequence. I don't think anything in any of the other adaptations has come close to that for me.
Okay. Of just the ones that are adapting the Dune first novel itself, which is your favorite?
Oh, of just the first one. Oh gosh. It's crazy, but I would have to say just visually, I love the Lynch film. And probably the best version of that would be the Spice Driver remix of, that restores all of the cut portions and basically, makes the whole thing make a little bit more sense.
Mm-hmm.
That one I think is, to me, just the most fun to watch.
Mm. Yeah, no, I get what you mean, because like I say, I found it was so weird to me that it's the same movie in one sense, but the difference in experience of watching the Spice Diver version versus the theatrical version and how much those extra scenes help. And I know the story, like I'm familiar with the story, so it's not like I need things explained to me. But it's like just having that linking material that doesn't feel like we're just chopping, all over the place that the theatrical version does there. Yeah, I definitely get that. Jess, what about for you? Which of the versions is your favorite?
I like the new ones. It just felt more Dune to me. And maybe that's just because I was very young when I had seen the originals. And so revisiting the originals as an adult, man, they don't quite hold up for me in a lot of ways. Like there's just some odd things that I feel like kind of happen in them. But it was because it was like a product of the time in a lot of ways. So I don't know. I really like the new ones. I felt like it. I mean, granted, it was 2 parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, but in the same way, the miniseries is a miniseries. I'm allowing because it's a telling. Really, it's
the
one
whole
movie to me,
story.
but but even though it's in 2 parts, so like I consider it one thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I really liked the new ones. So
Mm.
I'd say those won out for because I was worried about it when they announced they were remaking Dune. I was like with Van, I was like, really, are you going to do this? Like, why? We've already done this. Like, why are we just remaking everything? But after I saw them, I was like, okay, I stand corrected. I kind of love this.
All
And I
right.
also loved Blade Runner 2049 as well. So I get it.
All right. Van?
I don't know how deep you want us to go into them and talking about this and answering this question, but I would just say that there's something I like about all of them, and there's things I don't like about all of them.
True.
And I think that of the 3 versions, part 1 of the new one is the best, because I was sitting there in the theater watching part 1, and half of my brain was just enjoying the story and the show, but the other half was saying, oh, that's how he did that. Oh, that's how they scripted that. That was a smart way to do that, right? Because what you run into with Dune is trying to get a whole lot of information without overloading and info dumping. That's the great challenge of Dune and Lord of the Rings, honestly, right? But what Villeneuve and Peter Jackson both were able to do is find different ways to convey information without doing what Lynch did, which is like, here's an encyclopedia you need to read before you watch this movie, which they literally gave out in the theaters. But the thing with number 1 is I thought it was so smart in how it summarized things and how it abbreviated things and found ways to get you information without hitting you over the head with it. I thought it was great at that. I was really impressed. Part 2, I was very disappointed because while it looked fantastic and is a great story, I felt like he changed too much to the point that it was almost unrecognizable in places, and that disappointed me. So the most recent one, obviously, but I'll say this though, the 1984 one, for a movie that's 40 years old, it looks great. It looks great. And I always, before we had this new one, I always used to say that the difference between the 84 and the 2000 one is the 84 looks great but is stupid, and the 2000 one looks stupid, but the script is great. And the 2000 one looks like a high school stage play, but it's got a great script. So if you could kind of merge 84 and 2000 together, that would be ideal. And that's kind of what the Denis Villeneuve one did. So I guess I'll go with Villeneuve, but with reservations.
Sure. No, and that's fine. I just wanted to do kind of an overview because I do want to talk about each version a little bit and just talk about its merits. So I agree. But yeah, speaking to visuals, I think the Emperor's throne room in the original is so cool with the water motif and how intricately that is built into everything from like the walls to the floor. And it's just like, it's subtle, in one sense where it's like if you're not paying attention, you don't see it, but it's like it's all around there that this is supposed to be like a sort of like a water motif everywhere, and I really like that. But yeah, Kevin, what is your favorite?
It's got to be the new ones, the Villeneuve. Wow, I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but the new Dunes, part 1 and 2, and I just view it as just one whole. I was really blown away. Now, I'm a big music guy, and soundtracks always get me. And I'd say probably for me, one of the most important things in any music, I mean, not music, any movie, TV show, is like the atmosphere. So if it's got this great ambiance and soundtrack, that's what really like that's literally the only way to hit me emotionally is like that. So watching these new ones, between the visuals and the sound and everything, it just feels like I'm there. It feels like when the ships land, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's what a spaceship landing would sound like. Not like, in some of the old ones, they just everything just kind of floats and looks pretty, but it's got this visceral quality to it. And I mean, heck, when they landed on Arrakis, when the Atreides were taking over, and they march out there, and the bagpipes are playing, and I have always hated bagpipes. And I was in the Marine Band. We went to Highland Games. I have heard, so you can't say like, oh, I didn't hear the right bagpipes. No. I've heard many, many, many bagpipes. I've been to Scotland and heard bagpipes. Not a fan, but in that scene where the Atreides are marching out and they're doing their duty to take over Arrakis, and the bagpipes are playing, and at that moment, I was like, I get it. I get bagpipes. So that was just like, to me, the movies just had this emotional punch. Now, part 2, when I first saw it, I was kind of with Van a little like, I don't know about this, but I did rewatch it. I ended up seeing it about, I think, 4 times in the theater, and it actually got better with each subsequent viewing. Really like, okay, I'm taking it all in and catching all these little tiny details. And yes, he did go in different directions, but I see why, and I really liked how he played into the more the political and religious aspects of it, and how they're manipulating these people versus like the 1984. It's like, he really is the chosen one. Look, he made it rain on the planet. Things like that. So.
That was one of the things I appreciate about Spice Divers. They took the rain out. I was like, yes. Thank you.
Oh yeah, that was always dumb.
Yeah, and I've got a lot to say about 1984 Dune, but we'll probably get to that later in the podcast. So, but yeah, that's where I stand. I love the new one. I do want to say that, in 1984, they had the little toddler Alia who has that weird voice because he is the Kwisatz Haderach. And I think it's hilarious that the fetus Alia in the new Dunes is somehow still less off-putting than toddler Alia from 1984.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. And how, but yes.
I mean, everyone who does Dune ends up with the same question. How do you end an ongoing story? And Lynch was just like, rain.
Makes sense.
Desert, rain, happy ending, kumbaya. So yeah.
But was that what he was originally planning to do, or is that something the studio forced him?
I don't know. I mean, I'm saying it's Lynch, but it could have been the studio. I don't know. Lynch will not comment on Dune. Like from what I understand, he is basically like, I don't even want to revisit this or look back at it or anything. It's just kind of like, yeah. But for me, so I'm kind of like Van. I like all of them in some way, and I have some issues with all of them too. But I think for me, because it adheres the closest to the story of the novel, I like the miniseries version the best. It's funny because when it came out, I think it was 2001, so I would have been like 21, or I don't remember it looking like that. In my head, I gave it like cinematic like quality and everything. And when I went back and watched it, I see what Van's talking about now. It's a high school production. I was like, I can see the walls in the desert. Like, they're clearly in a studio, and I can see that they're painted walls. And I don't remember, and maybe it was because it was a standard definition TV that, probably like a 32-inch like standard definition TV I saw it on originally. But like, I don't remember like, and watching it on my TV now, even though it's a standard definition DVD, it's like, oh wow, that's.
So were they actually supposed to be outdoors? It was so bad I couldn't tell if they were inside in a Fremen cave that they dressed up to make it look like they're outdoors, or if this is the real studio and it's supposed to look like they're outdoors. So.
Some of the scenes where they were outdoors, you could clearly see the painted wall that they were in a studio. Well, because they didn't have the budget to go to an actual desert and film. Like they.
Yeah, they didn't have the volume back then.
Right, exactly. Yeah, nowadays, you can when you basically have the holodeck, you can just step into,
It was like if they did Dune like Babylon 5 in a hot tub factory. Throw up a green screen, everybody pretend you're in the desert.
But I think that they had some good actors. I think that they had a great script, and I feel like, as difficult as it is to convey Dune, I feel like in every area but the visual, that they did the best job of conveying that story in its totality. And so that's what I like about it. But keying off of that, so we've talked a lot about visuals. And obviously, you know, technology increases over time. But if we just try to sort of normalize, like, we already talked about it a little bit. Some of us have talked about the Lynch version. Some of us have talked about the new version. Visually, which of the movies is your favorite? So let's start with you on this one, Kevin.
So overall, the new ones. However, I watched the Lynch Dune. They brought it back to the theaters for the 40th anniversary. I went and watched it, and actually, right before the movie started, they had a little mini documentary they played about the special effects and just all the effort that went into it and making these miniatures, things that I didn't even realize were miniatures, and backgrounds that were painted, and they just put it all together seamlessly. So I was really paying attention watching it, and I was really blown away, with how well it has held up. That 95% of the visual effects have held up. All the practical effects have just completely held up so well. Some of them are crazy. Like, some of it feels like you're on some kind of dark Wizard of Oz. Some of it's almost like reminiscent of Alien and Aliens. It's kind of bizarre, but it's beautiful and it's held up really well. But then they've got the obligatory 1980s bad CGI, where they anytime they're fighting with the shields, or I think there's maybe one scene where a ship is flying or something, and it's got this jarringly bad CG where I'm like, oh God, I just wish that wasn't there at all. If they could just erase that from the movie. But otherwise, the practical effects are amazing. The new Dunes probably would just barely edge it out, because it's just the quality across the board visually is fantastic. I have no complaints.
I'm not sure how much was actually CG in the original Dune. So the ship stuff, I'm pretty sure, was like hand drawn onto like that's like hand drawn animation, like onto painted.
The ships were all very good, but yeah, definitely when they use the shields, the shield fighting, and they look like this like digital Gumby running around fighting. Just very odd.
I know, but for 1984, I think actually that was pretty good.
I agree.
I don't know that anything else at that time was doing anything, because it's taking your shape and it's protruding a shield out from it, and so I don't know how else they would have conveyed that back then. So I think for the time it was okay, but I understand nowadays we can do a better job of that. All right, so Jess, what about you?
I think I'm agreeing a lot with what Kevin is saying. I mean, but so for the time, I think what they were able to do with the original Dune was just incredible. I mean, it's 1984, and 90% of the movie visually really does hold up. I mean, there's some goofy things here and there. There's some things that if you watch it on high def, some things show through, but that's to be expected for a movie that's, am I mathing correct? Is that 40 years old? Yeah. So, I mean, that's pretty incredible that I can sit here and watch it, and it's parts of it are, we comment on acting later, but parts of it are a little overacted, like whatever, like it's the classic kind of like 1980s cheese or whatever, which is fine. But I think visually, considering what they were doing when they were doing it, I think it was pretty groundbreaking, along the lines of the original Star Wars. And so overall, I was watching it and I was like, okay, I'm surprised that this is holding up as well as it is, honestly. But it's also hard to compete with once you're used to more modern things, just the way that they're able to lay things out for the new movies. But I like bits and pieces of both. I mean, overall, it was impressive what they did with the first one. I mean, truly, for the time.
All right. Van?
So you're asking which one visually we like the best, just how it looks?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, as bad as the sci-fi miniseries was in terms of its production values, they made the thing for about $17.50, and it still it looks okay. I mean, I say, the funny thing about it though is I have a big. I guess I started noticing this a few years ago that when one person does all the costume designs on a movie, but the movie's supposed to show different cultures or different worlds. Like I think I probably first noticed it with Babylon 5 because like every alien, everybody, the clothes look like they were designed by the same. They all came. It's like if Adidas served every planet. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, everybody's clothes had the 3 stripes on the shoulders. And it's kind of the same thing with that Dune miniseries. Is that everybody from every planet at every layer of life and society, the same person clearly did their clothes. And so it just kind of, and usually weird, like they have like a triangle on their head or a pelican wings or just weird stuff. It's like they told the costume designer it's the future and it's kind of alien, and they went went crazy. But no, I think the most recent ones, obviously, they're just wonderful. I especially liked how they did all the armor because in a world where we've had stormtroopers for nearly 50 years setting the standard for what Sardaukar could look like, to have a completely different version, plus the way the Atreides soldiers looked, the way the Harkonnen soldiers looked, the way the Fremen looked, and they all looked totally different too, which I thought was cool. Mm-hmm. So that was impressive to me. Not only that they had very modern, high quality costumes and armor, but that they looked legitimately like they hadn't all been designed by the same, supply company in outer space. So that was good.
And that's actually a really good point because, Herbert was very careful about how he depicted these characters, that their culture and where the kind of environment that they grew up in, like, shaped them so much. So having them actually appear visually and their styles, to be different, is kind of important for conveying that when you're doing a movie. Nathan, I think you already said that you like the visuals in the 84 movie, but do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I have to commend the makers of the newer films because obviously the cinematography on those is flawless, and a lot of the concept art is really, really well developed. But the universe felt just a little bit too clean to me. You get these amazing, advanced spaceships that are almost featureless on the outside. I kind of the thing about the 84 version, visually for me, I love that sort of gritty space gothic aesthetic that they went with. It feels much more alien. Mm-hmm. Like this is a really weird other universe, that's not like ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's definitely, like sort of like the gritty, dark future sort of,
it's very
alien gothic. Yeah, it's very 80s, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But no, I totally get it. So for me, I got to see an ornithopter in the new version, and so all other arguments are invalid because
yeah, they finally get us good ornithopters.
Yeah.
I was like squeeing in my seat in the movie theater that I got to see an ornithopter like actually like move how I thought it should, and like it was so good. Yeah. I do have some problems with the new movies, but the visuals aren't one of them. When they have that scene when like the Sardaukar are landing and you see in space, you see the Guild Highliner, they're in orbit. Oh my God. And again, I was like squeeing in my seat because I was just like, oh my God, that's so good. It looks so good. So like as much as I do like the look of the 80s version, and obviously expense was not something they skimped on in that movie. And there are some stunning visuals in that movie. Like just for the sheer joy of some of the imagery that I was able to get out of the newer versions, I definitely think that's for me, that's what gave me what I wanted from a Dune movie, sort of for the visual side of it. Although not knocking the 80s version, because for the time period, I mean, I didn't look up what the budget was, but I'm sure it was stratospheric, and it looks good compared to other movies of that time period. All right, so Kevin brought up another thing that I was going to ask about, which is soundtrack. And which one do you prefer the music on? So Van, what about you? Which one do you prefer the music for?
Do they have music? No. You know what? The 1984 one has that great na 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 whatever it is. How the is it Brian Eno and who does it? There's like a
Toto did the soundtrack.
Hold that line, man. It's Toto, right? Roseanne.
Oh yeah,
Rosanna, and yeah, no, that's a very catchy. It's got to look. If you're doing a sci-fi movie in the '80s, the first thing you do is go get you a catchy classical theme song, possibly done by a rock band, if not John Williams. And that I was going to say that this is a De Laurentiis movie. And they share a couple of things in common. Because I was sitting here thinking, when you were talking about the throne room, I was thinking that reminds me an awful lot of Ming the Merciless. And I'm like, you know what? Because it was a Dino De Laurentiis thing. And they kind of did the same thing. And the 84 Dune has a lot of DNA in common with that equally god-awful but entertaining 1980 Flash Gordon movie, because everything that Dino De Laurentiis did was over the top, goofy, comic, bright colors, cartoony, brain dead, and yet somehow still entertaining. And this is the same thing. And so they got Queen to do Flash Gordon. It was the saving grace of it. And so they went and got Toto to do Dune, and it kind of works. I like it. I think the 84 and I don't even remember the music for the current one, for the new one. And if the Sci-Fi Channel, I think that if what I remember from the Sci-Fi Channel one, I haven't watched in a while, is just sort of like chanting, kind of voices or something. So it's got to be Toto, right? Come on. Anybody disagree? Come on. It's got to be Toto.
All right, Jess, do you disagree?
No, I don't disagree. I like both. I like both of them, but like for different reasons. So like in the originals, you've got that classic theme song, but I feel like the new ones put an interesting homage to it. So there were elements of it, but it wasn't exactly the same. But it still felt like the Dune theme to me, just maybe a little bit more modernized. It's just I do pay a bit of attention to soundtrack, and so I do kind of like the epicness of the new ones. But the old one is good too. It served its purpose, and I didn't know Toto did it. I had absolutely no idea. So that's pretty cool. But the original Dune theme is just kind of iconic. And so I feel like that's where I land.
Okay. Nathan?
I kind of have to give it to Hans Zimmer on this one. While I love the
Love
80s
Hans
version,
Zimmer.
it's definitely cribbing some notes from Lawrence of Arabia. And I love the video game soundtracks because I would listen to them literally for hours and hours and hours on end, and they're embedded in there somewhere. But just the stuff that Zimmer did, just really innovative music writing. They invented their own instruments. They got really experimental with it. There's some fascinating documentaries out there about what his team did in terms of developing all the sound effects and the soundtrack for these films. They really knocked it out of the park.
Okay. And Kevin, I know you were talking about the music for the new one. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, it's kind of an impossible question to answer when you ask me which soundtrack is better, because I feel like the Hans Zimmer soundtrack as a part of the whole, when I'm in the theater, when I'm experiencing it, it's amazing. It's got these visceral qualities, and it really, really hits me hard when I'm watching it. But I don't drive around in my car listening to that soundtrack. The 1984 soundtrack by Toto, I bought that CD when I was in high school, and I have listened to that hundreds of times over the years. I've listened to it so many times. So I feel like if I sat here and tell you that the Hans Zimmer soundtrack is my favorite, I'm lying through my teeth because I've listened to the other one so many times. And watching it in the theater when he's riding the worm and it plays that kind of like the electric guitar comes in, and I can't help but smile. It's not
That's
like
true.
the work of art that the Hans Zimmer soundtrack is, but it's like the one I'm gonna put on and still makes me smile to this day listening to it.
You can kind of
and then
jam to it a little bit.
yeah, I jam out to it. Interesting thing. So watching the 2000 sci-fi soundtrack, it had this theme that kept playing that I swear sounded like they'd stole it. They lifted it from the Lynch version, like this kind of like prophecy music theme. And then there was another theme that they would play that almost sounds like Hans Zimmer took from the 2000 sci-fi one. This kind of like this little flute that starts playing when they're in the desert. That's very reminiscent. What I do really like though about the 2000 sci-fi soundtrack is they actually have some like Middle Eastern, like desert sounding music at times. Not a lot of it, but it's sprinkled in, and I really appreciated that because watching the new Dune so many times and then going back to watch the David Lynch, it was jarring to see how white everybody was in the desert.
Yes.
I was like, these are the whitest
Yes.
desert people I've ever seen.
Well, I actually leaned over to Beth and I said, the Fremen have such courage because they burn with an instant of venturing out into the desert.
Yeah, because he's like, I'm gonna train these 100 fighters, and I'm like looking like there's 100 people there. I'm like, I can't find a single like non-white face in the bunch. But then watching the 2000 sci-fi, I'm like, oh, okay, they look like desert people. They look like in modern day, if you went to a desert, people living there might look like that. And then they sprinkled in the desert music. So I really liked those little touches. Sorry, got off track.
Yes.
I mean, say Siege Tabor was basically Ireland on Arrakis is where they landed.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it is the new version. It's the Hans Zimmer soundtrack. I like the music in the original Dune, but it feels like to me it's like the same three pieces of music over and over again. And so it's kind of like I like this, but I wish there was more of it. It's kind of like the same way I felt about the Batman, where I was like, I really like this music, but it's the same song for 2.5 hours. You know, so it's like variety, please. Whereas the Hans Zimmer soundtrack, it does not sound samey at all. Like, and I really like what he was doing. Like somebody mentioned visceral. Yeah, I feel like that's a great word to describe it, and it really helped me get into the movie. So yeah, I'm a fan of Hans Zimmer in general anyway, but yeah, I really like the Zimmer soundtrack. All right, so I know most of us have said we like different aspects of different versions, so we have a lot of different characters. And so just because you prefer one version over another, as far as the overall movie, maybe you prefer characters, how they were depicted in a different version. So I'm kind of curious, how people shake out with some of the main cast. So with Paul, who is your favorite version of Paul? And I probably should have looked up everybody's actor, but you can just say which version of the movie, like, so you don't know, everybody doesn't have to know every actor that played in every version. So for Paul Atreides, Kevin, who is your favorite, or which would have had your favorite version of Paul?
So probably in the new one, Timothy Chalamet, especially when going back to the book. I mean, he's like 15 when it starts. He's really young. And the other versions, he generally tends to look like an adult. I do appreciate, oh God, what's his name? In the 1984, in the Lynch.
Kyle MacLachlan.
Yes, yeah. I think he's a great Paul. His acting really held up. I do really like him in the role. But yeah, Timothy Chalamet is a really good actor. So as far as getting that age down and just kind of embodying the character, although he is like really skinny the whole time, so it I do wish he looked a little bit more like a fighter. He's supposed to be this phenomenal fighter who can best anyone in single combat, so if he maybe had a little more muscle on him. But Then again, he's using weird, witchy Bene Gesserit techniques, so I guess that makes up for it.
Okay, but Jess?
Yeah, I think I'm sticking with Timothy Chalamet. He felt more Paul to me. It's just kind of more how I envisioned how Paul would be, as opposed. I mean, like I agree. Like I love what like Kyle MacLachlan did. Like I think he did a really great job. But it's just he felt like like a fully grown adult, and I was like, you're supposed to be like a tad younger. And so that's where my knowledge of the books struggled with me, like kind of like embracing like the different versions of the movies. So I do feel like Timothy Chalamet appeared to be younger, so it felt more like Paul to me, and just kind of like the way he reacted to certain things. He was more hesitant to kind of like embrace like the like religious aspects of things and like be that prophet, which, if I'm recalling correctly, was more central to the character in the book, as opposed to like I feel like he embraced it a little bit more in like the older versions of the movie. So sticking with the new.
Nathan?
They all did a great job in different ways. I got to hand it though to the guy from the miniseries. I think his name's Alec Newman. Because he gets to take that character all the way from teenage Paul to grown-up Messiah Paul to ancient desert preacher Paul. And he just exhibits a tremendous range there. I mean, it's not a perfect depiction, but he really, really stretches himself, and you can see him doing it. So I liked that he was able to bring out a lot of aspects of this character. He had a lot more screen time, of course, than many of the other actors, because of the nature of the series. Yeah, I think he was excellent.
Yeah, and I do think like when we talk about like ages of actors and how they look and everything, I mean like the Lynch movie and the miniseries, had to deal with the fact, well, Paul ages throughout this story, and so do you cast young and then age them up, or do you cast old and age them down for the beginning part? And so, whereas in the new version, it's like it all happens in a few months, because Jessica doesn't even give birth. So it's like, this is all supposed to happen in the span of a few months. So they could have somebody who looked younger because they didn't have to age him up. But yeah, Van, who do you think was the best version of Paul?
I think that all three of them we were very lucky that, it would have been easy enough for any one of them to be bad. And I think that we really were kind of lucky that all three of them were good in totally different ways. And, I keep thinking Kyle MacLachlan was a great Paul for the 1980s, right? Because he's a star, he's a celebrity, he's got a cool haircut, and he's a studly guy, and, who goes on to do a lot of other things. And so, including with Lynch. So that worked. That totally made sense for that movie. But he was not the Paul from the book at all. I didn't think ever, but I thought he was great for that movie. And then I think that Alec Newman he was so not Kyle MacLachlan, and in some ways seemed younger, and then in some ways seemed older. And I don't just mean, because you're right, they were able to kind of age him along, and he was able to morph his appearance, and with makeup and everything, they did a really good job of making him age across those two miniseries. I thought they did really well. But he was a great lead for that show. Very charismatic, attractive, good job, good actor. But again, he never felt like the Paul from the book to me. He seemed more like a football player that came over to visit Paul or something, right? He just, I don't know, that's how he came across. And then Chalamet, he's probably the closest to the book character, I guess, and probably the best actor of the three. I think that's fair to say. But there's something almost frail about him in some ways, that he doesn't seem as intimidating at all. I mean, I guess Lee, that he could learn to be a great fighter. But I don't mean this in any way as a negative or an insult, but there's something almost feminine about him in some ways. And he uses that very effectively in his acting in different parts, and that's great. But for like the leading hero guy,
the physicality.
Yeah, it just was a little bit lacking. But again, I think all three of them, for what each of them was doing separately, each of them really hit it out of the park. All three of them.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, like the new Dunes, I do find it problematic that he's this pasty white kid, like super white. Uh, like, like bad at sports and all the stereotypes of, all that. It's like he's like that emo kid that sits in his room and, is, trying to write his, his song that's gonna, impress people and stuff. And it's just like, I
He does
don't.
brood a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, he broods a lot,
Absolutely.
and I think it fits the lens through which the new Dune movie is telling the story of basically the Atreides are these sort of predatory colonizers that have come in and are usurping the land and everything, and actually the special heir apparent is actually not so special and he's not great and all that kind of stuff, and I get that that's like sort of like the lens that it's going through, but for me that is not the book. Like, that is not the character of Paul Atreides. So like that, I that was not it didn't work for me. Whereas I feel like the miniseries, Alec Newman, I feel like is probably the closest, even though again, I also realize that no one has quite like nailed what I see as Paul. But like I feel like because this Paul goes through the things and is sort of depicted as the character, it as much in the book as I think any of the versions have, that even though he doesn't quite look the part and he might be a little too overly like action hero-y and a little older, that worked for me better. So that's my favorite version of Paul. uh Now, Chani, who do you think is the best Chani that we've had? So let's start with you on this one, Van.
Well, Zendaya is awesome. It's hard to say anything bad about her. It is. I was just thinking when you were saying that, I was thinking it's so funny that while in the book, Chani should be able to give like if Chani and Paul were to have a fight, it's even money who would win, right? But in the most recent movies, there's no way Zendaya doesn't kick his tail.
Right.
So it's totally her, right? But Barbara Kordatova was really good in the miniseries. I thought she and I felt like in some ways she seemed like the most realistic to that environment. She felt to me like that's where she would live, in the desert in that cave. Whereas, oh look, Zendaya is hanging out in this cave. It's not quite the same thing, And was it Sean Young in the first one? Yeah, look at Sean Young in a cave. Barbara Kordatova is the one that I felt like really assumed the part completely and was convincing to me the most as that character. So I'll go with her.
Yeah. Kevin?
Probably Zendaya. I mean, yeah, what's her name? Sean Young was kind of out of place to me in the '84 version. I gotta agree with Van though. The sci-fi miniseries, Chani, it felt like they flew out to the desert and they found a woman. Hey, do you want to come play this part? And like she's just being herself. Like she feels like this desert woman. And also they actually had the scene where someone comes to challenge Paul and she fights them and kills them because she's like, oh, they're not worth Paul's time, and that's lifted directly from the book. So I was really glad they had that. But I like the chemistry and like all the banter and everything with Zendaya in the new one. So I did enjoy all that. She's also the only Chani that really doesn't like where things are heading with the religious overtones, with the
Yes.
jihad, and that she kind of has a problem that Paul wants to marry another woman. Go figure. I don't know why, but in the other versions, in the book and the miniseries, where in both versions, Jessica confronts Chani, and she's like, "You're like, he can't marry you. He has to marry someone else." And she's like, "Yeah, I get it. I'm cool with it. That's fine."
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, would you be okay with that? Like, I mean, yeah, that is what happens in the book, but I feel like the Zendaya version is more, definitely more relatable to normal people watching the movie. Like, they wouldn't just agree to the father of their children marrying some other woman. I mean, as Paul says, she'll eventually come around. He's seen it in his visions, but she's got to process it first. But yeah, so I'd say Zendaya, but I do like what they did with the character in the 2000 sci-fi.
All right, Nathan.
I think I also have to hand it to Kodotova from the miniseries. She felt the most authentic to me. I mean, Zendaya is great, but she still sounds like she's from New York the whole time. You know, maybe there's an Arrakis on New York on Arrakis. I don't know, but
You're Ireland.
yeah, that made the casting a little, imperfect for me. But she is a fantastic actress and did a great job. Just whenever she talked, I kind of have to remind myself, oh wait, no, she's Cheney right now.
Mary Jane. No, not Mary Jane. What do they call her? Michelle Jones
MJ.
or something. Yeah, MJ.
MJ.
Yeah. Jess.
I do love Zendaya. I mean, she's a great actress, but so I kind of go back and forth on it because there are bits and pieces of her that I felt like were very relatable. Like kind of Kevin was mentioning, like she's gonna like stand up for like what she thinks is right. She's not going along with this whole like jihad thing. She's not going along with the fact that he's this like religious icon. Like she doesn't like that. She's like, you didn't want this. Like, why are you all of a sudden embracing it? And he's like, oh, I can see the future. Like the whole thing, the whole bit. And so I do like that bit is a little bit more relatable, but it is different from the source material, and it's definitely different from like the other movies and stuff. So I really do like her. I don't know, I think the original version, the 1984 version, I wasn't a fan of her. She felt a little bit too stoic. Like there was like no emotion almost. You know what I mean? Like it just kind of
She's
felt
barely
like
in the movie, okay? Even in the
there's also
Spice
that.
Diver. Like, barely there.
There's also that. Like she's this huge character and she's kind of just not really present. So I guess I mean, as far as like being like super authentic, the mini series for sure. Like I'll agree with what everyone is saying there. Just really do love Zendaya, just like personally, but I just love her as an actress. Although there are moments where
Your
she
criteria
takes
for
me
liking
out of
her
it.
version doesn't have to be the most authentic to the book. I'm just saying,
Oh no, I know.
who is your favorite? Like, yeah.
I just love her as an actress, but there are definitely moments like, I mean, I agree with what Nathan was saying. It definitely distinctly felt like her and not like the character Chani. So even though I do really like kind of like a little bit of the like departure where she's not cool with Paul just like marrying this other woman and just like kind of going for this like big ambition that he said he didn't even want. And she's like, what the hell, dude? Like, why? So I sympathize with that in that version of the character for sure.
Yeah. For its merits, I
Yeah.
feel like the Lynch version did Chani wrong. Like, hands down, like Chani's like an afterthought in that movie. So it's like, oh right, yeah, there's supposed to be this woman, and so like she's got to be there, but she's barely there. And while I think Zendaya definitely does the most dynamic version of Chani, and she's definitely got much greater presence within the story and whatnot, for me, the thing that loses it as my favorite version of Chani is I want to believe that Chani actually likes Paul. And I don't feel like that version of Chani actually likes Paul. Like they show them in bed together, but I'm like, why are you even in bed together? You don't like him. Like, like you seem to kind of hate him, so it's kind of like, okay. So like for me, it's gotta be the miniseries, because that's the one that felt like this is a couple, they actually like each other. Chani seems like, she fits into that, desert environment as others have said. And so like, yeah, I that's my favorite version of Chani. Although I agree, Zendaya is a great actress. And I just feel like as Chani, she didn't work for me. Whereas like in a different movie series or whatever, where she's a desert action heroine, I probably would have been completely fine with her. All right, Duke Leto Atreides the first. Let's start with you, Nathan.
Yeah, William Hurt, unfortunately, I think was terribly miscast in that in the miniseries. I don't think he did a great job at all, unfortunately. Oscar Isaac, I think, really nailed it. I was nervous when I heard he'd been cast because I thought maybe he was a little bit too young, but he really carried it off. He had gravitas. He had carried himself, with the dignity you'd expect for the head of a noble house, and you felt like he really, really cared about his wife and his son, and you really felt bad for him when he died. So yeah, I think he was superb.
Okay, Van.
No, I agree. Was it Jürgen Prochnow that played him in '84?
I believe
version? So. He was okay. He had kind of a European regal majesty to him that kind of came out of the screen. I thought was good. But no, from the very beginning, the biggest problem I had with the miniseries, other than the costumes and the stage setting or whatever it was on, was William Hurt. Just this is the last thing I pictured as Leto Atreides. Just not at all. That was terrible. So yeah, I think that Oscar Isaac, he's great in everything, and he was really good in this. I very much enjoyed him. Hey, by the way, are you going to mention at all the fourth Dune movie?
Oh, the one that never got made?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I just wanted to raise that little question with you.
I mean, we can mention it, but since there's nothing really to compare it, like,
there's a movie about it, so we know a lot about it.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that. I just knew that there was
yes,
like a 14-hour version that was in pre-production.
No, there's a movie called Jodorowsky's Dune that is worth watching. That is really entertaining.
Oh, okay.
The entire thing, yeah.
It would have been wild if they ever made it.
Came out about 5 years ago.
I mean, that's the amount of time you need to convey that story if you really want to convey like the whole story of that first novel. I've been saying like one of the streamings, like if these movies hadn't come out, like one of the streaming services should have done like a 10-episode series or something on Dune, because especially now that streaming shows can get like movie level budgets and everything, I'm like, that's what you need to do like a Dune adaptation, is have like 10 hours, and then you could do like a really fantastic like adaptation. But anyway, and if it's popular, they can do books. Each season is another book in the series, and you can actually like finally get to. Although I guess from Heretics, that might be a little.
Well, if the new HBO spin-off series does, and it does well, we might see future TTP adaptations. That'd be nice.
Yep. But Jess, who's your favorite version of Leto?
Oh, I loved Oscar Isaacs. I love him in a lot of things, and I was surprised when I realized it was him, because I was like, this dude like looks familiar, but I hadn't like looked up all of the cast. I knew like the main players, and I was like, why does he look so familiar to me? And so if I was like, okay, like who is it? I was like, oh my God, is that really Oscar Isaacs? Like he felt different, like he carried himself, he portrayed the character in just a very different way than I've seen him kind of like portray other characters. And I was like, he just like felt so much older and so much more, I don't know, like poised in a way. I don't know. I really liked what he did with it, and we got more time with him. I feel like in the 1984 version, they do sort of like shortchange that story a little bit because they just don't have the time. And so I like that we get a little bit more time with him. We get to kind of like develop their relationship a little bit, and I really enjoyed like the way he portrayed it. He seemed more genuine, and so like I did kind of appreciate how they like tried to have that influence, especially like on Paul. Although I'm not sure that by the end it really mattered, but I did like how they were trying to have him actually be like a decent dad. So,
all right, Kevin.
Oscar Isaac. Yeah, he was fantastic. He has the relationship with Paul is really there, and that line of, great men are called to lead, they don't seek it. And he's like, even if you choose not to answer the call, you'll still be all I ever needed you to be, my son. And it's like, oh, so emotional. The 84, the Lynch Dune, he looked the part, had some interesting acting choices, and it is odd he has a different accent than anyone else from Caladan. But and then William Hurt, it was so weird watching it a few days ago. I'm really happy to hear Nathan and Van say what they did, because I was watching it at first. I'm like, okay, his performance, it's really subtle. It's really understated. It's really low energy, and then finally I'm like, is this a bad performance? Like, he was just, he's like this movie actor, and he's like, why am I on a miniseries? How did I get here? And he's like just there for the paycheck, and it's just this very, very soft-spoken Duke. And it's like, dude, you're only on screen for a few minutes, and then your character dies. You need to make an impact, and you're not doing it. It was really odd watching that. But Oscar Isaac.
I guess I'm going to be the minority report here, because one of the things that I said when they cast William Hurt as Thunderbolt Ross was, man, is he miscast as Thunderbolt Ross? Because of course Sam Elliott is the natural Thunderbolt Ross, but he was great as Duke Leto Atreides, because to me Leto's overriding trait is his compassion. Whereas I get what people are talking about, the sort of the regality, but Oscar Isaac plays him as very aloof. He says all the right things, shows concern for the people in the spice hauler and getting them out and everything. But I felt a sort of detachment and an aloofness from his performance that I was like, whereas with William Hurt, I felt was the most compassionate of them, because Leto always struck me as he would never he would never be able to do the things that Paul did, because Paul's the one that ended up having the killer instinct and the desire to be at all costs we will win this thing, whereas Leto was too much about fairness and too much about we got to be nice and compassionate and everything. So I don't know, I felt like William Hurt did the closest to what I expected from Leto Atreides out of the different versions, although he's not in it much. I mean, none of them really are, but
is it fair to say that Leto is kind of the Ned Stark of Dune?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's accurate.
Yeah. What about the Lady Jessica? Let's start with you, Kevin.
Ooh. Well, when I was a kid, I thought the Lady Jessica in the Lynch version was very hot. big fan. I really like what she's done in the new version, in the Villeneuve version. I don't know her. What is her name? Rebecca Ferguson. She's really great in the role, and I love her change from before and after she transmutes the water of life, before she becomes a full Reverend Mother. Because before, she's like, we got to get off this planet, we got to be careful with this religious stuff, and she's much more timid. And then once she's got this full view of everything, and she's a Reverend Mother, and she's just full on planning, cunning, just doing, being a full-fledged Bene Gesserit, which she was before, but now she's viewing things on a broader scale. So, and just the manipulation. I feel like it's one of the only ones you really see the Bene Gesserit manipulation, where she's like, we need to change the people's minds. We'll start with the weak. It's just such a chilling line when she says that. I'm like, damn. But that's what they do. That's how they do business. And I really like how she conveys all that.
Yeah, Nathan?
I fully agree. She undergoes a transformation in that role, from where she starts to, you really feel like she actually has integrated herself into her, ancestral memory, and is now a different person. And she thinks differently, she acts differently, and she's honestly freaking scary. And that's an approach to that character I don't think I had ever really seen done before. And I don't think it was even that strong in the books. But the way that Rebecca chose to do that, I think was a great choice.
Yes.
Yeah, no. She's definitely like the low key villain of of the series, like for sure. I mean, she is a very, very gray, especially like after her transformation. And I do like that we get to see, like the full like 180 or whatever, like however you want to describe it. So like she's one person at the beginning, and by the end I feel like she is a completely different person. And like I'm kind of here for it, but she's like totally terrifying. Like some of the things that she says, I mean, like Kevin already like kind of pointed that out, is like, like we'll start with the week, and like how she's walking around like talking to like her unborn child, and just like the way she's like muttering. I mean, she seems like 100% a crazy person. And I love the way that she portrayed it. I did think she did like an absolutely fantastic job. And honestly, like if I'm kind of going back to like the other versions, like especially the Lynch version, like she's just way too, oh my gosh, like typical 80s female. And as a woman, I couldn't. I was like, no, no, no. Like I would rather you be this like cunning, like manipulative person who clearly has brains, as opposed to this person who's just like reacting and like, woe is me, and I can't believe my husband is dead, and just I'm a woman. Like I couldn't. So sorry.
All right, Van.
Well, I'll say this for Francesca Annis, okay? Just like with Prochnow as Leto, in both cases, De Laurentiis was able to go out and get these royal-looking actors, right? They look like they stepped out of a casino in Monaco, unlike the others. So they carry kind of this regal air with them that the other four don't, I think. The other four couples don't. They do less. They have less to do with it, right? But they have that aura about them that is very, it's impressive. I really like Saskia Reeves, but she just doesn't have a whole lot to do in the first one. I mean, and she's kind of low key. I think she's better in Children of Dune, where she gets a little bit maybe more to do. But thing about Rebecca Ferguson, yeah, her performance is fantastic, but she's kind of the least just to look at, just like the charisma and the image. She's kind of the most slight. She's just kind of small, and I mean, she's in everything now, so I can't even see her except seeing Rebecca Ferguson, right? I was wondering when she had to get back to the silo, basically. Which is a really good show, by the way. But so she's all over sci-fi now. But yeah, I think they each bring something to the table in different ways. Again, kind of like with Leto. But I have to agree. Even though she doesn't jump off the screen maybe the way that Francesca Annis does, I think she does the best job. Ferguson, yeah.
Yeah, my thoughts are kind of similar to Van's on this one, because to me, Francesca Annis, she projects an image of the Lady Jessica that if I was reading the book, this is how I imagine her being. This, how she carries herself, like her physical beauty, this just, how, she's perceptive, like those are the kinds of things that I think of with Jessica. I was also I'm a huge fan of the movie Crawl, and so I was like, oh my god, it's the Widow of the Web. But so that was cool. Yeah, I think I agree with what everybody's saying, though, as far as like overall performance and just meat for Jessica to do. The new movies and Rebecca Ferguson has a lot more to do. She's showing a lot more of that manipulation, and that's definitely a more interesting character overall. But yeah, for me it was different from Van, though, because I kept expecting her to go on a mission with Tom Cruise. So like, but yeah, she's everywhere now. But yeah. So Stilgar. Jess, let's start with you. Which version of Stilgar do you like the best?
Okay. I'm actually going to go old school. I feel like I like the original portrayal of Stilgar the best. Because he felt the most like Stilgar to me. Maybe, I don't know. Van's laughing at me.
No, I'm not laughing at you. I was trying to think who that was because it kind of blanked out. And I looked on IMDb and I'm like, oh, it's Everett McGill. Oh my gosh, that just is not you. And that's a funny voice. Everett McGill just makes me laugh because we've been so conditioned now to think of him as a darker skinned, desert dweller, and Everett McGill is like the guy that works at 7-Eleven or something. So I just or the manager of Walmart. So I just didn't quite. But yeah,
okay, that's fair. Okay, maybe not like visually. So like, because like we all agreed, the original version is very white, very whitewashed, and
Yes.
a product of the times. Product of the times for sure. But just the way he came Cross just felt a little bit more Stilgar to me. In the new movies, like I like the portrayal and I like the actor and I like what he does, but he is I don't know. This is where I can't remember from the books like how into the prophecy like he was. I know somebody at some point I know like Jessica had a hand in it, Stilgar had a hand in it, like at some the whole prophecy thing, like with propping Paul up to be like who he is and who he becomes. But it just at times in the new movies, like the heavy-handed, like, oh my gosh, you are the prophet, like you are the one, it just got to be too much for me. Whereas like he felt more like the mentor in that kind of like original version. And so I liked that version better as opposed to kind of like the fanatical, devoted person that he ended up being in the new movie.
Dan?
Oh, now this is the fact that this is such a funny one overall because they're so different is why I was laughing at what just
They are.
when you brought up that actor, I just lost it because it's Everett McGill. But he's another one of those David Lynch road company guys that's in everything he does. I just can't believe that was the part that they gave him. That just surprised me. But anyway, I got the four of them here, and I mean, I don't know. The guy that was in the 2000 miniseries is so weird. He was just creepy and weird and had this strange magnetism about him. He was something. I wouldn't want to be alone in a room with him. He scares the crap out of me. And I thought that the way that who plays him in the new one?
Javier Bardem.
Yeah.
Bardem, yeah. Bardem. The thing about what Javier Bardem did with him was make him alternating between terrifying guy that will murder you as soon as look at you and funny buffoon and then fanatic, and he could switch among those different parts so quickly because he's a great actor and it's an interesting part. It's arguably one of the best parts in the story for an actor. And so I appreciated what Bardem did with it. I thought he was really interesting. He was convincing in all three of those phases that he had to be in.
Yeah.
But but that guy in the 2000 miniseries he's just alien enough and creepy enough. He was Uwe Oschenknecht. Okay. I don't know where they found him, but man, he made an impact. I'll just leave it at that. So he made the biggest impact. Again, when you look at Bardem doing Stilgar, you're like, well, of course, it's Javier Bardem. He does a great job at everything. Of course, he's a good Stilgar. Sure. This dude comes out of nowhere and blew my socks off. So,
all right, Kevin.
So the Lynch Stilgar, I liked. I just love his. He's not my favorite. First of all, I just want to say I love his voice. He's got this deep, he's like like, it is the legend.
Right.
Shai
Yes.
Hulud.
He does have a good voice.
Maybe I'm just jealous of his deep voice. I'm like, man, that Stilgar, like that voice is so good. Yeah, God, I definitely haven't given the miniseries enough. Like I just watched it once, like 3 days ago, so I don't I don't have this like a history with that movie. But yeah, definitely Javier in the new one would be my favorite. I didn't realize that was Javier Bardem. I think I'd watched the movie like twice, and I didn't realize. I really only knew him from No Country for Old Men. So then I saw an interview with the cast members on YouTube, and I'm watching it, and I see the guy from No Country from Old Men's on there, and I'm like, who did he play? I was like racking my brain. Did he play some little bit like background character? I don't remember, and because yeah, he looks a little different in the movie, and he's just so immersed in the part. I didn't even realize that was him. But of course, he's not. I mean, I'm not rating how much I like things based on how close they are to the book, because this movie is different from the book, and he's going in a different direction, and he's going in a more religious direction, and religious manipulation. And then we're seeing him, he's one of the religious zealots who's been waiting their whole lives for the prophet, the Mahdi, and now he's here, and he's seeing it play out in front of his eyes, and you see him go through this kind of transformation from this like mentor leader to comrade to, by the end, he's just kind of like a obedient follower, and he's not like the Stilgar you knew at the beginning.
That's what bothered me.
Yeah, but he does a fantastic. But I mean, I guess I'm looking at it as that's what the point is in this movie, and that's what he's trying to do, and he plays it perfectly.
That's true. You're right.
Nathan?
Yeah. In fact, I probably should have mentioned earlier that when I first discovered Dune, I was living overseas in Egypt. So
Perfect.
Being in that environment and that cultural context, really brought it alive in other ways for me. But the reason I mention that is, Javier Bardem is not an Arab actor, but the way he portrays that character is so on the money to a wide variety of older Arab leader figures that I knew back then. So he has obviously done his homework, and he has studied the mannerisms and the speech patterns and the sort of jovial, way that an Arab leader will manage a group like that, and then get serious when he has to get serious, and then you kind of sit up and pay attention, when they get serious. So I thought he really, really nailed that performance. It was very authentic to the culture, and I really appreciated that.
Well, that's really good. Like, I'm glad you brought that out, like your own personal experience interacting with similar culture. For me, I guess my standpoint, which might be close to Jess's on this, is that I like Stilgar too much to see him as a credulous idiot. Like, that is the thing that really bothered me about the new version, is I'm like, because they even have a scene where like he goes up to some of the other leaders and they're like, Stilgar, not again. It's like every day, like they make it seem like every day he's like, Lisa El Gabe, oh, Lisa El Gabe. And I'm like, that is not, like, Stilgar's not a moron, right? Like, because he's even like not sure about Paul throughout a good amount of the story in the book. It's just kind of like he thinks it might be Paul, but he's kind of like, if you die trying to ride the worm, oh well, like, I guess it wasn't you, like, it's not like he's like, I'm all in zombie follower. So like, I don't know. I felt like that was kind of insulting to Stilgar, who is probably one of my favorite characters from the book.
That actually does happen in the book, though. By the end, he is like, Paul sees him as like he's diminished because he's become like a follower versus like what he was before.
Yeah, but I feel like by that point, Paul's like fulfilled everything. It's not like right in the beginning, which it's kind of like in this movie. It's like almost instantly. It's like, send out Gabe, like, and it's just like totally in. And so I don't know. I just felt like, I felt like it kind of weakened Stilgar quite a bit as a character. So for me, it's the miniseries. I felt like that's the closest thing to what I wanted from Stilgar. Like Van said, he seems like a guy who'd be scary to be in a cave, by himself. And yeah, I felt like he was, the most. Yeah, the problem with the Lynch version, besides the fact that he looks so Caucasian, is that and I agree with Kevin, he's got a great voice. He's also got like such a small role overall, like in the movie, where it's just like, and also Stilgar over here, like he's got a few lines and then, not much, happens with him. So yeah, I think the movie series gave Stilgar a good enough part, and I felt like the actor like fit, like what I wanted to see from Stilgar. All right, here's one that I'm going to be very curious because I think we might get an even spread across all the versions. The Baron Harkonnen. So let's start with you, Van.
Oh.
All right, let's see. Well, Ian McNeice is awesome. I loved him in Rome as basically CNN. But the problem that McNeice has is I thought he was very well cast if you just want to find a good, probably affordable actor that kind of looks, fits the part physically and can do the Shakespearean emoting and rhyming. I love the rhyming.
Yes. Oh God, I was so happy he did the rhyming.
He embraces it. But the problem, again, after seeing the 84 Lynch version and what they did to that actor, I can't name Kenneth McMillan. What they did to poor Kenneth McMillan with the makeup. Ooh. And then you see Ian McNeice and you're like, he got better. He went to a dermatologist. He's gotten better. Good for him. So I felt like, Kenneth McMillan was able to rely on the practical effects, the makeup and everything. And he chewed the scenery too. I mean, that's one of the requirements of that part is to be able to. You're basically the Darth Vader of this story, and you got to chew the scenery. And I think that's what I didn't like. As maybe I guess it fit the tone of the movie better, but the new one, having Stellan Skarsgård, I just rewatched the 2004 King Arthur, and I love that movie. I think it's very underrated. And Stellan Skarsgård is the leader of the Saxon barbarian warriors that invade England in it. And he's the exact same character because what he does, I mean, that's one thing that's really cool about Stellan Skarsgård. He can play different types of character. He can be the goofy professor in Thor, running around with no pants on or whatever. And then he can turn around and be like Attila the Hun, and you buy it both times. And what he does in Dune as the Baron is what he does in King Arthur. Almost plays it exactly the same way, which is very slowly and speak very softly and deep, and everyone will think that you are scary and profound and everything, and you're moving slowly. I'm going to kill you. And I mean, that's just a completely different way of playing the character from what McNeice and McMillan do, right? It's just they basically said, I'm a big Shakespearean villain, so I'm going to play it that way. And Skarsgård internalizes it, takes it down about 12 notches, and says, I'm going to be Jaws, right? I'm going to be under the surface, just the fin showing, kind of barren, rather than the teeth and the chomping like the other two guys. So, I mean, it's just hard to compare them because McNeice and McMillan are doing the same thing very similarly, and then Skarsgård's doing a completely different thing. And I think it really just comes down to, do you prefer your villain to be oh, or do you prefer your villain to be ooh? It's just two different ways. So I actually prefer the same performance in King Arthur to the Dune performance. And if you haven't seen that, check it out. So and honestly, Kenneth McMillan kind of grossed me out too much. I'm going to go with McNeice. Dang it. Boom. There it is. I'm going with Ian McNeice. 2000, baby. There we go.
Took us a while to get there, but we got there in the end.
I had to work my way through it. But bring it on.
All right, Nathan.
Oh, gosh. I don't really think there has been a definitive Baron Harkonnen depicted yet in any of the versions that have been made to date. The 84 version, I mean, he was, almost like a mad dog. He's, screaming and flying around and, just shouting at everybody. In the miniseries, we get a very broad, almost pantomime performance. I mean, I love Ian McNeice. I know him through the convention circuit. He's a great dude. But yeah, that it didn't have the darkness I think that character needed. And then Sarsgaard takes it maybe even a little too far in that direction, and as was mentioned, sort of underplays it a little bit too Godfather. And then times it was almost hard to understand what he was saying because he was mumbling so much. Yeah, to me, the Baron is both a Machiavellian planner, but also a very also a gleeful sadist.
Yeah,
I don't think we've seen that combination yet. So I'm gonna reserve judgment.
okay. Took the fifth on a question on a podcast. Wow. All right. Kevin.
Honestly, Nathan is onto something here because
I don't like any of them.
Well, I do.
Well,
think the
like in this
miniseries-
context means like would most as a villain, like you don't have to like him as a character.
No. I get that. Oh, sorry. Kevin,
Okay, yeah,
please.
we'll get to it.
I mean, the Lynch Baron is he's unhinged. He's over the top. Some of it's actually entertaining. It's not like the Baron in the book. It's entertaining, but he's just so gross to look at. I could just do with it. I like to say the Lynch Dune, it's 70% masterpiece, 20% just weird goofiness, and then 10% gross. And you could just cut out the grossness, just throw it away. I'd be perfectly happy without it. Stellan Skarsgård is like as far as just being an intimidating, sinister villain, he's probably the best. But Ian McNeice, I was really surprised. To me, he was one of the standout performances in the miniseries because he really nails the character. It's one of the only Barons we see doing some of the most scheming and manipulating, which is, I really forgot so much from the book that like all these various manipulations and schemes, like for instance, he's promised Piter that he can have the Lady Jessica. So in the book, it gets to that point and he's like, all right, Piter, here's your choice. There's a ship. You can take the Lady Jessica, hop on the ship and fly out, never to be seen again, or you can take over Arrakis and govern it. And the Baron has already figured out, he knows what Piter's going to do. He's going to choose power and wealth, and that's what he does. And then the Baron is just pleased to see everything playing out exactly how he planned it. So very different from like the mad dog, rabid Baron we see in other performances. So yeah, the miniseries, he comes very close. He looks and embodies the part. They always sort of give him red hair. It's like red hair or bald. The book, I don't really think they describe his hair. I think they just have brown hair or something boring. But now the brown hair is boring. But
It's probably the soulless thing.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess Stellan Skarsgård maybe is for me like the most intimidating, like this is a villain to be scared of in a movie for me.
Okay. Jess?
I'm more in Nathan's camp here. Like, okay, Stellan Skarsgård was like too low key for me. Like he wasn't like enough. Although on the flip side of that, I also don't like the original 1984 version that's like all like makeuped out. Everything is super gross. And I'm like, I can't even like handle like watching you in some of these scenes. Like this is kind of just grossing me out a little bit. So I guess when it comes to like the scheming, the manipulation, and maybe being like closer to the book character, I'll go with the mini series because he just seemed to have a little bit more like thought in his head, whereas like I think in the newer films that's what like Stellan Skarsgård was like trying to get across, but it just was like too too low key. Like there just like wasn't enough there to kind of give me what I felt I needed from the Baron himself. And then in the 1984 version, in David Lynch, he just seemed too gregarious, too over the top, too much, too 80s.
Yeah. Also, there was a smaller runtime, so I think he felt like he had to go as big as possible, to make an impact on the audience. So I think that might have also factored into that performance. But
I forgot to mention, they always make him fly in the movies. Every single movie. I don't know why, because in the book, they describe the suspensors, they help support his weight. So he's got a bounce to his step when he walks, because he's got these little suspensors helping to support his weight. And then Lynch was like, let's have him just float everywhere. And then since then, every single person that makes a Dune adaptation is like, yes, the Baron just floats and flies around like Superman, which
I don't have an issue.
I don't know why.
We rented a crane. We're going to use it, Dana.
Right, exactly. I feel like, hey, if the great Ian McKellen can come to work one day and say, I feel like flying today, Brian, like good enough for Ian McKellen. All right. So yeah, for me, I feel like, the like has been said, the 1980s version very much ratchets up the disgust. Like that's what this is. This guy is just gross and sadistic. And like people have said about the modern version, it's kind of a low-key performance. We try to get the disgust out of he bathes in machine oil. I'm not really sure. Again, I feel like, sort of a spoiler for what I was going to say later anyway. I feel like the new movies are very unsubtle. And I feel like it's like, let's have an anti-pollution message in here. And yeah, I get that the Harkonnens do pollute their world, but it's kind of like we tried to make the Baron disgusting in a lot of different ways in other versions, and it's kind of like in this, it's just all about like pollution, and so it's kind of like, okay, whatever. But Ian McNeice, I feel like it's a few things. One has been said, we show his intelligence, we show the craftiness, the scheming. The Baron Harkonnen thinks of himself as a cultured individual, which again we get with the like the rhyming. He likes being clever. He likes thinking like, like I'm like this special noble and I should have all the stuff that like the Atreides have because I'm just as good as they are and all that kind of stuff. I agree that they don't show as much of the personal sadism as they could have, and maybe that's not quite as much, but we show the fact that he's a pedophile and that he killed the kid that came into the room that faded made into an assassin. So it's kind of like, okay, like we show a lot of like sadism, grossness, problems like with the Baron. So it's kind of like I feel like he has the most overall barrenness to him, although maybe it's not quite like the book. But I do feel like this is the one role where I feel like all three movies gave us a pretty good performance, and it's just like different aspects of the character came to the fore, more so than any other role that we've talked about. So since we are getting kind of far along here, and it's getting kind of late, for other characters, like I'm just gonna give everybody just a chance to say like any other like performances you wanted to shout out from any of the versions. Just do that here, for any of the characters we haven't talked about yet. So, Nathan, is there anybody that you wanted to sort of just shout out about for any of the versions?
Well, I think we have to mention Jason Momoa because he took the character of Idaho, who's very dynamic in the books, and then has been sort of a cipher in all of the previous adaptations, and actually made him a well-rounded character that the audience likes and is excited to see, and feels terrible when he gets killed. None of the previous versions, I even have trouble picturing their faces because they were barely there.
I know. The first novel, the first movie, it's like Paul's so upset that Duncan dies, and I'm like, he had like one scene before this.
I was like, wait, who are we talking about? Oh, that guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I just hope that he's able to make it back for the million clones that
And I was going
later
to say,
books require.
Nathan, that what's so funny to me is he dies obviously in these movies, and this is where people that have read the books, or I guess seen the Sci-Fi Channel series, are like in a quandary, right? Because people are like, "Well, I guess we'll never see him again." You're like, "Oh no!"
See a lot of him
Right.
over
Wait.
and over again. All right, Jess, is there anyone that you wanted to mention that we haven't talked about?
We haven't talked about Gurney Halleck at all.
Mm.
And I mean, especially in the original one with it being Patrick Stewart. And it kills me, like the sitar thing that he plays. I love how they managed to work that into the different versions. I find it very entertaining. Although it just like I mean, of course, like my timelines are all messed up, but he felt like the least like Patrick Stewart to me in like the original version, which I feel like is very difficult to do as he gets along in his career. And so it was just really kind of entertaining for me to like watch him and like know who the actor is, but like have him not just feel like Patrick Stewart. So that was kind of fun for me.
Yeah, I was disappointed to find that my favorite line of his is not even in the theatrical version, which is like a wild ass in the desert, go I forth to my work. Kevin, anyone that you wanted to shout out about?
Yeah, I do like Patrick Stewart as Gurney, and Jason Momoa really surprised me because I was like, Jason Momoa, really? Like him? And you know what? He's supposed to be this legendary swordsman. He barely fights in the 84 version, and I don't think he fights at all in the miniseries. And then he just gets shot in the face with a missile. It's a very sad way to go. Jason Momoa actually kicks ass, which is nice. But I'd like to just give a shout out to Brad Dourif for playing Piter de Vries in the Lynch.
I knew you were going to go there.
Yeah, he's one. I love him as an actor. He's just so delightfully creepy and weird in everything he's in. And for
epic eyebrows.
Yeah, and for nice. And for that role for Piter de Vries, he's the twisted Mentat. They don't even scratch the surface of that in any of the movies. But yeah, he does such a great job. He brings his own little mannerisms. He's got all these interesting little hand gestures. You know, he's like what did he say? Like the bodies must never be found. And he's got like these interesting little gestures and things. And yeah, I love it. It's a delightful performance.
He is, and like the Piters in the other versions are just again afterthought type characters,
very forgettable.
But he brings that creep factor because he does talk about Jessica and about how he's like imagined all the pleasures that he'd have with her and all that kind of stuff. Where it's just like you're like,
it's better for you to die in the innards of a worm.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, of course, Éowyn's interesting too. Jessica Éowyn. Which I wanted.
Yeah, when they cast him as Wormtongue, I was like, "Oh my god, perfect casting!" This guy's always the crazy, creepy guy.
And he wasn't even originally cast; he was a replacement, which I never did hear who the original was. But I'm glad it worked out because he was perfect. Yeah.
And actually, one thing about that line with him creeping on Jessica and saying it's probably better she dies in the desert, they leave out. So in the book, it's because being around her is going to impair his Mentat abilities. He won't be able to function to a high level because of her presence. So he says it's probably better that she dies in the worm. But they leave that out, which makes it even creepier in the movie. Mm-hmm. Like, I was going to do such things to you. You'd rather just be eaten alive than endure that. So works either way.
Yeah.
Good line in bars, I guess, to pick up.
All right, Van, are there any character, any performance you wanted to call out?
For sure. All right, I was going to do Brad Dourif. You covered him. Awesome. Love Brad Dourif. Jose Ferrer as the Emperor. Born to play an Emperor of something. Yeah. Born to be the Emperor of something, and I love him as the sort of stuffed shirt, arrogant, kind of likable though emperor. Probably my favorite emperor of the three. Yeah, it's funny. The emperor from the miniseries ended up in a garbage bin in one of the James Bond movies, which was kind of strange. I want to mention Julie Cox as Princess Irulan. I thought she was there's something about her just jumps off the screen in a part that is not very big in the other two versions. But what's her name? Pugh. What's her first name?
Florence.
Florence Pugh. I thought she does good in a very small role in the new version, but I thought Julie Cox gets so much screen time in the miniseries and in the sequel miniseries, and there's just something about her that just really grabs your attention. She's very charismatic, very attractive, and gets you. And then Sting. Come on. He had Sting in that movie. Talk about stunt casting.
Yeah.
He was perfect. He was perfect as Fader Alpha. So, yeah, Sting, baby.
I mean, they're definitely just going for the visual, though, because, that fade is not... He's there to stand there and be Sting, and that's pretty much, all he's there
I'm
for.
going to kill you, but first, Roxanne.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
another
really
joke I
glad
made
you
with my
mentioned.
wife.
I'm glad you mentioned Julie Cox though, because I don't think Florence's part may have been as big as it was if Julie hadn't expanded that role in that previous version.
That could well be. Yeah. So I had hoped we were going to have more time. It's always kind of hard to judge these things. So really quick then, just as the sort of final question that I'm going to put out, I was going to take a little more time and just discuss each version, individually. Well, I mean, kind of link the Lynch theatrical plus Spice Diver. But just to say pros and cons, what do you feel about each version? I mean, we've all mentioned which one is our favorite and why. But what aspects of each one do you like, or anything that you feel like is kind of, egregious about each one? If you have anything like that, though, you're and this is why I don't really care for this one as much. So let's start with you, Nathan. What aspects of each one do you like? And is there anything that really hurts your enjoyment of any of them?
I think the thing that really hurts the 84 version is the overuse of voiceover. And that I just wish they could have shown more and told less. A lot of that stuff is, it's interesting to those of us who know the source material, but I think for the average movie watcher, that must have been just really dull. With the miniseries, obviously they suffer from production values. People make fun of the funny hats a lot. I don't know. I think they're kind of charming if you treat them as theatrical productions. In terms of the faithfulness to the source material, that's really their strength. They have some great performances in them. And you get to spend longer in the universe, which is great. And the new films, they're big and glitzy and look and sound beautiful, but maybe don't have the same depth as some of the others. So they all have pros and cons, and there's a place for all of them. And I hope the films continue. I really, really want to see a film adaptation of God Emperor. I don't know how that's going to work, but it's my favorite of the books, and I really want to see it on screen.
Well, supposedly, I mean, it hasn't been confirmed, but supposedly we're getting Dune Messiah at least. So we'll see if that happens. Yeah. Jess?
Oh, man. Okay. I feel like this is hard to do. So, I mean, overall, I feel like quality and production value, of course, we're going to have to go with the newer ones just because, they're newer. So they have the advantage of the new technologies. And then I think maybe for me, some of the sticking points there are just some of, the departures, or maybe the over focus on kind of the religious mania and all of that sort of stuff. I know that is and does become a big part of the books, but I feel like that was more like Dune Messiah territory as opposed to like Dune territory. So it was kind of interesting that they went that heavy with it in, in like the first telling of it. 1984 version, there was just like, I feel like some interesting choices with it. So I like the whole thing with like the modules and like the sound waves. I couldn't
I
really.
I was expecting someone to bring up the
Oh
weirding
yeah, we never talked
modules.
about that.
Okay. I was like, what is happening here? Like, I was like, maybe I've just completely forgotten what's gone on in the books, but this just seemed like kind of out of left field for me. It was kind of like entertaining in some ways, and in other ways, I was just kind of like, what is going on now? So that was a little weird, but overall, I do respect like the 1984 version for what it did at the time and like what it brought to the table, and just trying to take a sci-fi story, an epic sci-fi story, and bring it to a larger audience. And I applaud them for attempting to do that. The miniseries gets more time, which is always great. Much lower production values, definitely a con, but I do like faithfulness to source material, and so I definitely appreciate that.
Kevin?
As far as the faithfulness to source material, my views changed over the years. I used to just view it as anything the same as in the book is good, anything different is bad. But now I just view each as an adaptation. They're on different forms of media that have different strengths and weaknesses, and different artistic visions. Like Jeff Goldblum, we love him as Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park. Totally different than the character in the book. The character is kind of boring in the book. The 2000 sci-fi really tried to stick to the book, and if you just made a checklist of how many scenes from the book did they hit, it hit the most. But I also feel like they don't have time to flesh it out, because it's like they're trying to hit all these wickets. Like they have the banquet scene and they're talking to the water broker and all these different people, and there's the smuggler, but you don't really get like the background on these characters. You don't get all of the subtleties that are there. And really what Nathan was talking about with the all the voiceovers and the Lynch, but that's in the book. Like there's just so much internal monologue constantly going on. The fight with Paul and Fade at the end, where Fade is kind of favoring one side. So Paul is like, oh, he's got like a weapon hidden in his suit there. And it turns out the weapon is actually on the other side, his other hip. He was favoring purposefully so that Paul would think that the weapon was hidden there, and it's actually hidden in the other spot. And all these great subtle things, but there's just no way to convey that in a quick action scene on the screen. So instead, it's like, well, let's just have a really cool fight. And that works very well in the new one. I appreciate the Lynch version, just like the 80s sci-fi, like dark sci-fi. I have a lot of nostalgia for that. The soundtrack I love, some of the standout performances. But then the new one I appreciate. I mean, some people would say it's not as deep. I guess I see it more as streamlined. Like things like Leto Jr. He's in Paul and Chani have a kid, and he dies. And Paul is sad for like a page in the book, and then the story moves on. And there's really even in the book, there's no real payoff. I mean, he mentions every now and then, but it doesn't change anything he does. He's not like, so what are they going to do in the movie? Stop and grieve and like it. I get it now. Like you have to build up this character. There needs to be a backstory, and then there needs to be some payoff. And it's easier just to leave it out. And the same with the banquet. We're not going to build up all these characters and what's going on politically, so let's just cut the scene out. But the new one for me, it's like I enjoy it start to finish. I enjoy every second of the movies. I don't most movies there's like, oh, here's where it gets boring, or here's that scene I don't like, or here's the gross boils on his face or something, and that I could do without. But the new ones, it's just pure cinematic enjoyment start to finish for me. Maybe not entirely faithful to the books, but really, really fun experience that I enjoy.
Van?
I've kind of talked about the first two enough, so I'll just say the thing about the most recent one that I think is really good and not so good, the which I alluded to a little bit earlier, the way that the screenwriters, I guess Villeneuve and whoever, anybody that helped him, the way that they were able, because Nathan, you mentioned the voiceovers, and I completely agree. And the challenge with Dune, like I said earlier, is to get that information to the viewer in a way that's elegant and not clubbing you over the head. And they club you over the head in that movie. And so I just thought they did such a good job with the new ones of getting a complex story down to the most simplistic, basic way without losing much, right? They didn't lose much. That was the best thing about it to me. Beyond the visuals, music, everything was just being able to make that story make sense for the average moviegoer. That is a huge. They should get best adapted screenplay just for doing that. Okay. The thing that I was disappointed with is the very end, because, right, the whole point in the book and the first two versions, I think, right, is that Irulan is this highly educated, beautiful, desirable princess that anybody in the universe would want to marry and have a dozen kids with. And she ends up, because of the way this politics stuff works, she ends up with Paul, who basically says to her, I'm never going to show you any affection. You're never going to have any children, certainly not with me. We're never going to sleep together. I'm not even going to be around you. And in fact, I'm going to have this other woman over here that I'm going to have babies with. And you're just going to sit on the throne with a little crown and be the empress, and that's your life. Go write your books. And then Jessica says to her, history will call us wives. And that's how that book ends. I thought that's a great last sentence. And in the movie, they went for like the Beverly Hills 90210 ending. You're marrying somebody else. I'm going to go be in a huff. The end. And I'm just sitting there going, that's not Chani. Chani gets it. She's not a teenager that's going to go throw a fit. She understands the politics of this better than Paul did, probably. So it's like, on the one hand, I could see Denis Villeneuve going, oh, I know how to end this movie, and young people be like, yeah, Chani, you show him. But that's such a dumbing down of the story and the ending that it just really disappointed me. And that was when I was kind of like, I've been with you for 6 hours at this point, and right at the end, you dropped me off the cliff. So.
Yeah. For the first movie, it is interesting to me how much of a role editing plays, because I did not like the theatrical version when I saw it. It felt very choppy. It felt like, and again, it was like somebody tried to take the whole book, because they're like mentioning stuff that doesn't matter, talking about, oh, we've been at Ix and there are these machines and everything. And it's like, if you haven't read the book, you don't know what they're talking about or why it's important. It's just like, we're just going to throw that out there. And it's just like, pick the narrative and go along that narrative, because they were trying to do everything. 3 hours helps a lot. The extra hour in the Spice Diver version helps a lot with I mean, there is still some extraneous stuff that has nothing to do with anything, but at least, like, say for instance, Thufir Hawat shows up at the end in the Spice Diver version, whereas in the movie it's like, yeah, we'll show the Harkonnens like that they're like drugging him and everything, but it disappears, and it's like, okay. Like, why was that scene even in there? So at least there's a payoff, even though I didn't like that they kill him off as part of the payoff. But, there was a payoff at least for that in the Spice Diver version. The weirding modules, I'm glad you brought those up, Jess. Yeah. So random, so dumb. And in fact, it is one of the things I really dislike, because what they do, why they're there, is there to create this thing where, like, Leto is creating this secret army because he wants the throne, which isn't in the book at all. Like, Leto is the most loyal above board guy, and it's only the Emperor, because he's so paranoid that he sees Leto as a threat when there is actually no threat there, and which is why the Baron's able to get him to ally with him and everything. But it's like, oh no, we're going to justify this, by saying that he's developing the secret army to one day attack the Emperor, and like they have him even say at one point that the reason why he wants Paul, or Paul says that it's to somebody at some point, I can't remember who says it, says that the reason why Paul has to keep himself open for a political marriage is so that someday he could go for the throne. And it's like, no, it's just political marriage. Like, I mean, that's in a feudal society that, nobles, make alliances, for reasons of resources or, various things to like ally, you with another family. So yeah, but overall, I do like the Spice Diver edit. I do think that it is, a fun movie to watch. I don't mind the narration so much because I was like, at least that helps them, with the voiceovers, like convey things that are very difficult to convey. It doesn't bother me to the level it does some of you. But I was just like, I'm glad that they can use that at least as a tool to help convey, some of the stuff that it would just be like impossible to like show. Miniseries, we've all complained about the production values on it. But overall, I think that is probably my favorite version. Although I would say that the Spice Diver edit of Lynch's version is probably fairly close to that. I just like the fact that, there's some stuff that I think is a little crazy, like Irulan, how much they beefed up Irulan's plot, and like the whole like she's gonna go and she's gonna sort of quasi seduce Fade and have her like maid like fully seduce him and all that kind of stuff felt a little weird to me. But it's like I get that they're trying to pay like their problem is in the book, we see all this stuff that Irulan's writing as we go along. So like we already feel like we kind of know Irulan as we're getting through the book. In the other versions of the movie, like Irulan's just kind of like, oh, by the way, here's your prize, Paul. It's kind of like, so we tried to like give her like a significant part in some way within the narrative. So I understand what they're doing there. But I like that version probably the most because of the comprehensiveness of it. The new version, when I saw the first part of it, I felt like, of course, it was visually stunning, great music, all of that kind of stuff, great great actors, in the movie. I felt like there was something lacking emotionally. And it wasn't until I got to the second version or the second movie that I kind of felt more like understood more of what I didn't like is that, oh, this is not trying to tell the story of Dune as like a straight adaptation. This is very much a sort of like trying to create this as sort of like for sort of a modern audience as far as like what are the issues nowadays, what are the things that we talk about and sort of like have those come to the forefront of the story. I do feel like whereas Frank Herbert, when he wrote these books, he understood the complex interaction between, you know, human biology, ecology, psychology, politics, all of this kind of stuff as all these things interact with each other and cause these complex dynamics and everything to happen. And so he never boiled it down to good, bad. People make choices. Sometimes those choices those choices always have consequences. And I feel like Villeneuve has said that he wants to make Dune Messiah, and that's where he would end it, which I kind of understand because I always thought when I read Dune Messiah that was the perfect ending. Even though I like the other books and everything, because I feel like that, having Paul go through the full cycle of becoming you are the problem, and you thought you were the chosen one, but you've kind of you are you were kind of, but because you did all these horrible things, this is your punishment. And I kind of feel like, well, we sort of just telegraphed like the whole thing, like, like what Paul's doing is wrong. And, we kind of have made that so overt that I'm like, is Dune Messiah really going to do? The Chani's already got a faction that agrees with her that what he's doing is wrong. And it's like, the whole thing about the Fremen turning on Paul, like in the, and that some of the Fremen were becoming disillusioned, everything, that was like a big deal in Dune Messiah. So again, I don't understand like what they're doing with this version. So I felt a disconnect that grew in the second part with the new version. And because I do feel that even though we, now feel very much that like European style royalty and everything, like, there were a lot of, we know from history, there were a lot of evils that were perpetrated by that. I still appreciate having a fantasy world where that stuff can be okay and we don't have to worry about it through a real world lens. It's I don't know. But yeah, I felt kind of disconnected from the new ones, even though I think visually and musically they're very good. Um, but yeah. So yeah, I mean, like that's all. I mean, I think we've covered a lot about Dune. 2.5 hours almost. So I appreciate you all coming along for the ride. Does anyone have anything that you're like, oh, you cannot end this without bringing up?
Yeah, I have to mention that weird little spinning merry-go-round thing that the emperor and his generals are sitting on during the battle at the end of
Carousel,
the
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like those, those cheap little merry-go-rounds like outside the grocery store that like the sad little kids that can't afford to go to a real theme park. Like it's like spinning. I kept expecting it to stop, and the emperor is like, "Put another quarter in," and and it's weird because they're looking at the battlefield and their view isn't spinning around. So why is I'm just so confused. It's just one of the many things in that movie that I watch, and I'm just so confused. Like, why is this like the cow or like the cat? Why does Thooper have to milk a cat? So, but it's a fun movie. But oh man,
Well, even
those
weirder
choices.
on in that box, there's a little mouse taped up in the box also, which I never.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a mouse taped to the cat.
Yeah.
So
Why is the
weird.
They don't
mouse
even
there?
mention that. It's just there, and we see it, and we all say why. Yeah, I'm actually glad they kind of cut Thoofer out of the new ones afterwards because I feel like there's no payoff. Like the Baron gets him to his side, and then he just kind of shows up at the end for this awkward scene, which I had totally forgotten that scene in the book. So watching the Spice Diver edit, I was like, "What is this weird ass scene with Thoofer?" I'm glad they cut this out. And then the book, I was like, "Oh, shit, that is a scene in the book, and it's just as weird and awkward in the book." So I'm happy with that not existing. I wish they spent more time on Mentats in the movies overall, but again, it's like I guess it's harder to explain. It takes more effort. Paul is a freaking Mentat candidate. He's undergone like conditioning his whole life in the book. And that's how he's like able to pick things up so fast when he gets to Arrakis. It's not just that he's the one, the Kwisatz Haderach. There's also the Mentat conditioning. They don't touch on that at all in any of the adaptations. So
I'm hoping the new series may flesh that out a bit more.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I guess that's about it. I could go on all day, but
Right, yeah. I mean, we don't have all day. All right. Anybody else have anything? All right. Well, like I said, thank you all for joining me on this. Now let's say our goodbyes, let people know where they can find us. So let's start with you, Kevin.
You can find me right here on your podcast. And some days I'm working at a hospital here in Florida. So if you have surgery, I might take care of you.
You're a 42 cast exclusive, Kevin. All right, Jess.
But you can generally find me on the Tomorrow's Legends podcast talking about the Tomorrow people currently. Depending on when you're listening to this, we might be into Superman and Lois, the final season. And then after that, I have absolutely no idea. So, but we have an entire back catalog. So if you're remotely interested in Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, Stargirl, and several other random series we've picked up along the way, feel free to check us out. You can find us anywhere podcasts are found.
Nathan?
You can find our Pixel Who stuff at pixelwho.com, of course. Same on Instagram, Pixel Who Art on Twitter, because somebody stole our handle. But also, if you attend pretty much any Doctor Who convention or any large Comic-Con on the East Coast, we'll most likely have a booth there.
Now, you go to Dragon Con too, right?
We have, not in recent years because we had some date conflicts. But we'll definitely be at Baltimore, definitely be at New York.
Okay. Very cool. And Van?
You can find links to everything, everything at www.plexico.net, plexico.net. You can find all of my various books on Amazon or in bookstores or whatever. And I'll see whoever I see at Dragon Con. I'll be all over Dragon Con again, probably. And I'll have a table in Pop Artists Alley when I'm not on one of those panels.
All right, very cool. And Kevin, Jess, Nathan, and Van, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah,
Thanks
great.
for having us.
Thank you all.
Thanks for having me.
So that's it for our discussion of the Dune adaptations. What did you think about the episode? What do you think about the topic? What topics would you suggest? And of course, the question we always want to ask, how you Dune? Lynch, Harrison, Villeneuve? Just let us know. We would love to know, and we'd love to know why you feel that way. And you can do that in a bunch of different ways. One way is to email us at everything@42cast.com. Another way is to go to our website, 42cast.com, and leave a comment on any of the episodes there. You can go to our Facebook at facebook.com/42cast, or you can contact us on X, Instagram, Blue Sky, or Threads at 42cast. You can also join the 42cast Discord server. There will be a link in the show notes that you can use to join the server. And we would love to see you there to engage in discussions about the show, about our topics, about geeky stuff in general, all of that. So once again, go to Discord, and if you have a Discord ID, you can join our discussions. We would also appreciate if you would leave us reviews on your podcast platform of choice. With Apple Podcasts especially, that is very helpful because the more reviews we get, the more we show up in searches. So if you have an Apple account, if you haven't left us a review yet, we'd really appreciate it if you would do that. You can help all the shows on the ESO Network by going to the ESO Network Patreon. That's at patreon.com/ESO Network. You can review the perks for the different tiers, whether it's early episodes of some shows, exclusive episodes of some shows, or a whole exclusive ESO Network podcast. So if you have the funds to contribute and one of those sounds interesting to you, we would love it if you would help us out. You can also find me on 2 other shows. One is Time Streams, where my friend Juliet and I are going through all of Doctor Who from the beginning. You don't have to watch the episodes to understand what we're talking about, because we go over all the important things of each story as we cover it. But if you are able to do that, if you do have access to the episodes, you'll definitely get more out of it. The other show is Legendary Forces, where Juliet and I again, but joined by Joe, Ashley, and Corey, are going through all of Star Wars fictional media from the beginning. That's books, comics, movies, of course, and anything on TV, anything that happens within the Star Wars universe. That show is currently on hiatus, but we do plan to bring it back in 2025, so keep watching this space for that. In other news, Beth and I are watching For All Mankind. I was able to get a 3-month free trial of Apple Plus, so we finished Monarch Legacy of Monsters. We were quite interested in that. We liked it. I think I liked it more than a lot of the American movies because I feel like that street level discussion and drama allowed us to get a lot more emotional connection to the things that are going on with all the kaiju stuff, whereas I feel like with a lot of the American movies, they just focus on monster fight spectacle. And even though they spend a lot of money on these fights and there's a lot of effects going on, there's no heart to those movies. Kong Skull Island is the one that I would say is the exception in that case, and that's my favorite of the Legendary Pictures movies, and it doesn't even have Godzilla in it. But yeah, we're looking forward to season 2 of that when it eventually comes out. But yeah, now we've moved on to For All Mankind. It seemed like that was the show that the majority of people were saying was really great on Apple Plus, so definitely checking that out. So far, I'm very intrigued. I think it's a little less up Beth's alley, but the whole alternate history aspect of it, and then the space aspect of it, I'm just like, yes, give me more. I love the alternate history. Like, how would this have played out? So, you know, I get really engaged with that. So I'm so far really interested, even though we've only gotten a few episodes into the first season. But I do really like it so far, so we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes through. I believe there are 4 seasons out currently, with a 5th one on the way, so I'm very curious to know how it goes and how far into the future they play this thing out, and how far down the timeline does it go. In con news, I am going to C2E2 this year for 2 reasons. One is John Rhys Davies is going to be there. He was going to come to the Wisconsin Comic Convention when that was happening last year, but when that con was canceled, I did not get my chance to meet John Rhys Davies, but he is going to C2E2 this year, And so for me, that is a priority, especially because I already had my excitement up to meet him in person, and then that was dashed last year. So even though money is a little tight for us right now, I'm going to do that. The other reason is because there are several people from Once Upon a Time going. Right at this moment, they've signed Regina, Zelina, and Robin Hood. And I asked my youngest daughter if she would be interested in going along, and I had just shared Once Upon a Time with her a couple of years ago. We binged through the whole series together, and she was very excited about that. So to get one of my kids finally interested in going to cons, I am all for that. I will encourage that, because for many years the kids did not like going to cons. They might like looking at the costumes for a little bit, and of course they love spending money in the dealer's room. But other than that, they were not interested in any panels or the celebrities or anything, and they never wanted to stay very long. They just saw it as, oh, we're going to like a big store. So I am excited that she's excited about meeting some people there and the actual guest part, and hopefully she'll be a little more engaged with cons. Maybe we can find a panel that the Once Upon a Time people are going to do and go watch that and all that kind of stuff. So looking forward to that. It's going to be an exciting thing. I'm happy to have her sort of engaged with the whole process. So that's it for this week. Join us back next week when we are going to Chicago TARDIS 2024 with a panel that my wife recorded where I get to interview Fraser Hines, Wendy Padbury, and Sophie Aldred, namely Jamie, Zoe, and Ace from the original Doctor Who series. So it was a great honor for me to actually be able to interview people on the main stage, the first time that I was able to do that. And so I want to share that experience with all of you, and hopefully if you are fans of Classic Who, you like hearing those actors giving their comments. So until then, this is Nathan, signing off. You have been listening to the 42 Cast, copyright 2025. Got a question for the ultimate answer? Contact us at everything@42cast.com. Theme music is Sharper Swords by Brandon Ellis. Check out more of his work at www.cityfires.com. The 42 Cast is a proud member of the ESO Network.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.